The Eye of the World, the final episode in the Wheel of Time Season 1. I had a lot of hope going into this finale, and that hope was kind of crushed. Book 1 is sort of universally known to not have the best ending. It's a little bit confusing, and since Amazon has already changed a lot with the show, I figured this would be a good opportunity to change the ending to make it a little bit better. But it didn't really do that. Even in the behind the scenes, they talked about how they wanted to make it less confusing than in the book, and I don't really feel they succeeded with that. If anything, it's kind of more confusing. And I'll get into why. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy this episode for simply the spectacle. There's a lot of it, but it's a lot of empty spectacle that reveals a lot of issues. There's a lot to cover that I'm gonna get into, so this review is basically going to be me explaining why the finale fails, but also I'll be talking about the parts that I like as well. I've been captured by the dark, friends. If I'm ever to escape, I'm gonna need your help. 1 subscribe equals 1 dead Trolloc. If you want to help me escape this prison, I'm gonna need you to subscribe. We need an army to fight the Dark One. So if you followed my episode reviews, you'll know that I was very critical at the beginning, and then I started to enjoy the show more. By episode 7, I was actually pretty positive. I still have a lot of criticisms, but that episode was actually one of my favorites. But there was a lot riding on this final episode, and I felt like if they nailed it, it would make up for some of the poor writing and pacing and editing that the show has had so far. But they didn't quite nail it. It was actually kind of a disappointing and underwhelming final episode. Now, I'm not one of those book fans that think this show is a total disaster. I think there's a lot of good stuff here, but I also see where they've made a lot of bad choices, and also just putting the books aside, there's just a lot of issues with the writing and the editing, and just developing their characters and plots in general. That being said, I'm still hopeful that they can recover in Season 2. Now, I don't know if I'm just trying to be optimistic because I really want this show to succeed. I want the Wheel of Time, for lack of better comparison, to be the next Game of Thrones. This is such an epic story, it easily could be, but it just comes down to how this adaptation is handled. And so far, it's kind of all over the place. I hate to repeat what everyone else is saying, but a lot of it comes down to the fact that 8 episodes is just not enough time for a huge, sprawling, epic fantasy. And it shows. I've spoken to several people completely new to the series that are pretty confused about a lot of things. For future seasons, they really need more episodes and stronger screenwriting and probably more time to edit those effects. The budget is not to blame. Anyway, let's talk about the cold open. First of all, myself and many others were expecting this to finally be the Dragonmount prologue from Book 1. If you don't know, this is an iconic prologue featuring Lews Therin Telamon, the dragon, going mad, and we see the beginning of the breaking of the world, where everything was set back thousands of years. It's the moment of the dragon's destruction, which sets in motion the events that would make his rebirth a necessity. It's something that I thought would be incredible to see on screen, and it would explain a lot of things. Now, it isn't a requirement for them to adapt this part, but I'm just baffled as to why they didn't when the cold open that we do get just is kind of dramatically flat and feels about as restrained as Logain. Yes, you can argue that we already got the Dragonmount prologue and the X-ray animated bonus content, but I still think it would have been more powerful here during the finale. Anyway, here we see 3,000 years ago, the dragon speaking with the Amyrlin about his plan to seal the Dark One. The state of the war just isn't really conveyed here. Lews Therin's plan is years and years after fighting an uncaged Dark One and being on the losing side. So they're kind of desperate, and the flourishing city doesn't really convey that, but it was cool to see. Latra seems to imply the dragon is acting out of pride, and even predicts the consequences that the male half of the One Power would be corrupted. This prediction did not happen in the books. The Dark One lashing out and corrupting the male half of the power was not anticipated beforehand, and I feel like this is kind of painting Lews Therin in a bad light. It was actually at a time when all other plans had already failed, and imminent defeat defeat was approaching that Lews Therin marched off with his army of 100 and went to seal the Dark One's prison. And he would have succeeded without being corrupted if the female half of the One Power came to his aid. The show version just doesn't really make his plans seem heroic at all. One thing I noticed is that the Amyrlin referred to him as the Dragon Reborn, but Lews Therin was the original dragon. He hasn't been reborn yet, so he should just be called the Dragon. I did like how he was wearing black to represent Saidin and she was wearing white to represent Saidar. And later we see Ishamael wearing both of them to represent the whole One Power. I also loved getting that shot of the city. In the books, it's mostly hinted at what the Age of Legends was like, so it's cool to see how advanced they were. We see this beautiful sci-fi utopia. I'm guessing a lot of the budget for this episode was in that shot. By the way, if you compare this to the ruined skyscrapers in episode 1, you'll notice it's the same city, which I thought was a pretty cool Easter egg. But again, nothing in this cold open is filling us with impending doom like we should be feeling at this time. Okay, now let's talk about Rand and Moiraine. The Blight does look creepy, and we learn it's a very dangerous place, but we don't really see any shadow spawn, and there's not really any danger that Rand and Moiraine run into. Rand is instructed not to touch anything because the Blight is a rot, and we see a body that it's infected. But then a little while later, they're just sleeping on some trees, I guess. I guess those trees were safe then. I've noticed a few times where the show kind of contradicts itself and breaks its own rules. Rand is having more creepy dreams, and the fiery-eyed guy pushes an arrow into his eye and morphs into this man. Surprise, surprise, it's Ishamael. Who is Ishamael? Well, when the dragon and his 100 companions sealed the Dark One, they also sealed off the Forsaken, who are basically the Death Eaters of the Wheel of Time. And this man is one of the Forsaken. I think the show kinda tried to explain that, but if I was new to the series, I don't think I would have gathered that info. He's one of the 8 Forsaken that Steppen was trying to ward off, though there's actually 13 of them in the books. Later in the episode, we see Moiraine show Lan a piece of Quendiar. Now, Quendiar, also known as Heartstone, is an almost indestructible substance created during the Age of Legends. It's so strong, it will even absorb the One Power and become even stronger. So the fact that this is broken shows that at least one of the 7 seals on the Dark One's prison is broken, which explains why one of the Forsaken is able to intrude into everyone's dreams, even manipulating Swan's dream to lead them into this trap at the Eye of the World. He is known as the Betrayer of Hope and the Father of Lies. Now, fun little backstory on Ishamael, he was actually once an acclaimed philosopher and theologian who came to the conclusion that due to the wheel's cyclical nature, the Dark One would have unlimited amount of chances to break out of his prison and he would eventually win. So he chose to join the Dark and become one of the most powerful Forsaken. Here they've sort of tamed Ishamael down a lot. In the books, he's pretty much insane, but here he's kind of calm and collected. I do think the performance was really well done. I think I just would have preferred the more insane approach. Also, his outfit is giving me kind of a waiter vibe, Waiter of Chaos. It sort of looks like an apron toe. I'm not really a fan. Anyway, they get to the Eye of the World, and the Eye is kind of a letdown. In the books, it's this big pool of magic that gets obliterated, and then underneath there's the horn and the broken seal. Here it's just some ruins, and the horn is back in Faldara. It's actually being dug up right now. I think it would have meant more if they explained what these seals on the Dark One's prison were before they went to the Eye of the World, so that we understand what just happened. Oh, also goodbye Green Man. I kind of knew they weren't gonna put him in this adaptation, but since the Green Man is such a big part of our real world mythology, I thought it would have been pretty cool to see him represented. Now Rand tells Moiraine that he remembers being here, so this is actually the memories of Lews Therin seeping into Rand, as they're the same soul that's been reborn. And apparently he once fought Ishamael here, so you think this might happen again. You know, history repeats itself. Now, it was Ishamael's goal all along to use Rand to get free of the prison. Padan Fain even tells Perrin later on that their goal wasn't to kill them in the Two Rivers, but it was to lure the dragon to the Eye of the World. Anyway, so he feeds Rand this lie of a fake life with Egwene where they have a baby, everything's peaceful. Meanwhile, Moiraine holds a knife to Rand's throat because it would be better to kill him than let him fall to the dark. Now, I actually really enjoyed this part of the show. This was one of the positive moments for me. Even though I said I would have preferred the more insane approach, I do really like how relaxed Ishamael is here. He seems seems completely confident that he's in control of this situation. I also like Rand realizing that he can't live in this fantasy because it would mean denying Egwene what she actually wants. This reinforces Rand's decency. So then he breaks free of Ishamael's prison and he channels the One Power into the Sarangrial. And after all this buildup and some awkward editing, nothing really happens. It's not even really a fight, it's just a poof. This is my biggest problem with this episode, is that this whole confrontation is shockingly underwhelming. I was expecting some crazy power, and then it's just kind of a flash of light, and the Forsaken is fading away. It felt very cheap after all the hype. Judging by the little smirk he gives, he's not gone forever, this was all part of his plan, whatever. Rand is supposed to be very powerful, and he's using an item that makes him even more powerful to take down the most powerful Forsaken. And all we get is a little poof. It just feels like wasted opportunity that again takes away from the importance of the dragon in the story. Seriously, Nynaeve can go all Super Saiyan and heal a room full of people and later assist in killing an army of Trollocs, while Rand, so far, can knock down a slightly sturdier door. And also that, whatever that was. They've underplayed his power this whole season to keep the mystery going, which is fine, but this episode was the time that he was meant to shine. In the book, Rand had this overpowered moment where he destroyed a huge portion of the Trollocs at Fal Dara by accident, because he can't control his power yet. This is what we want to see from the dragon. Instead, we get untrained channelers linking and destroying thousands of Trollocs, which I'll get into in a little bit. But really, that's nothing. If you want to kill more Trollocs, all you gotta do is subscribe. One subscribe to my channel equals one dead Trolloc. That's just a fact. So you too could be a Trolloc Slayer. Rand being the dragon should be a much bigger deal. This is what the whole season has been leading up towards. But while the actor does a solid job at conveying Rand's fears and confusion, the writers did not do a good job at writing this confrontation with the scary man in his dreams. None of what happens in the Blight comes off as more significantly important or impactful, even though it's what ultimately decides the outcome of the battle. I don't get why the audience wasn't given any information on Ishamael or the Dark One's seals before all of this. If they did, the fact that Rand was just tricked into breaking the seal and setting the Forsaken free would be a much bigger deal. It would have left a much bigger impact on the audience because they actually know what just happened. And this comes down to the show having supersonic pacing that has no time to explain anything. Now we're led to believe that Moiraine has been stilled or cut off completely from the One Power, but it looks to be more like she's shielded from it. It looked like Ishamael kind of tied a knot. She tells Lan that she can't touch the source, and judging by how season 1 has been going, apparently neither can Rafe Judkins. We don't see Lan do too much this episode. He gives this big romantic speech to Nynaeve, which I just didn't really buy. I mentioned in the previous episode how I'm invested in their romance, but here it just seems too diehard all of a sudden, and I don't think we had enough time for their relationship to develop into such a serious one. And then he ends up finding Moiraine and cradling her head, but he never fights any Trollocs or helps defend Fal Dara at all. Now Rand is scared because men who channel go mad, and he doesn't want to kill the ones he loved like Lews Therin did, and he also doesn't want to be gentled like Logain. So he goes off on his own, and he tells Moiraine to tell everyone else that he's dead. Okay, time to discuss the Battle of Tarwin's Gap. So considering we got a pretty good battle scene in episode 1, I was kind of expecting a mini Helm's Deep or Blackwater, but we didn't get either of those. I felt like the show was building up for this big battle, but then it just didn't deliver. And the effects on the Trollocs and the Myrddraal look very unfinished. Honestly, I don't really mind a fantasy show with cheesy effects, but this is Amazon, and I'm a reviewer, so I'm gonna point out that it looks unfinished, and it looks like they needed more time in editing. It very much looks bad. It looks very bad. Then after the Trollocs breakthrough, we cut to Amalisa, who we know trained at the tower, but isn't really strong in channeling the One Power. Somehow, she's able to form a circle and link with all the other girls so they can combine their power, which is pretty advanced for her to be able to do. I think the idea of this scene is neat. I like how she's so shocked when she connects with Egwene and Nynaeve because she can feel how much power they have. But I mean 3 channelers that are not strong enough to become Aes Sedai and 2 channelers who are completely untrained untrained, wiping out the largest army of Trollocs we've seen in centuries is a little far-fetched. Why even have a dragon then? You can just have all the Aes Sedai get together and link up and destroy all the Shadow Spawn. Also, the fact that these 5 women had the power to stop all these Trollocs, but willingly let all the soldiers die first, somehow makes me question their morality. I really dislike how they're portraying Egwene and Nynaeve and their ability to use the One Power without proper training. It kinda cheapens the whole reason for people to receive training and become Aes Sedai. Anyway, they link up. Problem is that the One Power is like a drug, so if you use too much of it, it's intoxicating and you can't control it and you end up burning out, which we see happen, and this fulfills Min's earlier prophecy. Nynaeve cuts the link and takes all the power into herself to save Egwene, and then she dies. I mean, it clearly looks like she is dead, but then Egwene just revives her and everything's okay. They're the only 2 in the circle that end up surviving. If the plot armor is this heavy, why should I become emotionally invested in these characters? They can just bring each other back from the dead. Nynaeve and Egwene already had their moments, and I feel like this should have been Rand's scene. Or it would even make sense if they were completely surrounded by Trollocs. They weren't able to kill as many as they thought, and the 5 women were slowly dying. We see Nynaeve begin to come back to life, and then it pans out to Rand, who's unleashing this big outburst of power that's healing his friends and obliterating the Trollocs, so that we can see how powerful the dragon is. But no, apparently Egwene can bring people back from death with the power of friendship. I just really despise these fake out deaths where the person is fine 2 minutes later. It's a cheap way to add tension and emotion, and it destroys any stakes. Oh yeah, that's right, they kill another character later on as well. Okay, so Perrin helps the soldiers dig up the legendary Horn of Valir to be used at the last battle to call out the legendary heroes of old to fight the Dark One. Before they can make off with the horn, Padan Fain arrives with some bad dudes to steal it. I love Padan Fain's entrance here. I thought his performance was great, and this is one of the few positives I have with this episode. I would like to see more Padan Fain. But then he stabs Loial with the dagger from Shadar Logoth, which should kill him. But Rafe Judkins confirms that Loial is not dead. Okay, thank goodness. I mean, I'm glad he's not dead, but also why? Maybe the dagger works differently on Ogier, maybe it's not at its full power after leaving Matt, I don't know. Non-readers probably won't care a lot because he didn't get a lot of screen time, but he's a character that's deeply loved by the fans of the books, and it just seems like a pretty cheap emotional thing to do, to pretend to kill Loial. It feels cheap, it feels like it's done just for shock value, to get people talking. So anyway, the finale is trying to figure out something to do with poor Perrin. It's pretty clear that his character was supposed to go through this arc where he's traumatized by the death of his wife, so he's tempted by the pacifism of the Tinkers, only to realize that he can't stand by the sidelines while his loved ones are being hurt. I can kinda see the outlines of that throughout this season, but it just never really connected strongly enough to hit home in this finale. Actually, the whole Fellowship of the Dragon, we kind of have an idea of who they're meant to be, but they're not developed enough beyond those archetypes. But especially Perrin, he didn't get much payoff. Okay, so then it ends with this fleet of ships arriving and summoning this giant tidal wave that I guess is visually impressive, but like, what are you gonna hit, an empty beach? They must really not like that little girl. I'm sure maybe there's a city around there somewhere, but we don't see that. Now, having read the books, I know that these people are very, very scary, but new viewers are not really gonna know what this is. Looks like we got some new villains for season 2. That's very exciting, isn't it? I mean, there's already Trollocs and the Myrddraal and the White Cloaks and Dark Friends. I said before that this is how I wanted season 1 to end, with these people arriving, but I just think they could have built up this threat a little bit more by mentioning these people a couple other times, other than the one bath scene at the tower. So overall, I would say this is probably the worst episode yet, in my opinion. It's not completely terrible. There's still things to like about it, but there's just a lot to criticize as well. The thing is, Robert Jordan worked hard to create a build-up to the climax. He gave us little bits of information and lore so that when something happens, we can actually anticipate it and feel more tension because we understand the stakes. But this is where the show kind of fails. We don't have that decent build-up. They're not explaining a lot of stuff. Everything just feels pretty rushed, and it's hard to connect with the characters because of that. There's just not enough information or character development to really care and become invested. expected. And again, it's because of the supersonic pacing. We don't get enough screen time with any one character because there just is too little episodes per season. They seem to have an issue with investing in stakes and having plot points pay off. Sure, the bond between a warder and an Aes Sedai is something that's very important throughout the entire series, but maybe don't have a full episode dedicated to Steppen when you're not going to pay it off by the end of the season. Maybe build it up slowly and save the gut punch until later on. I guess you could say that it was building up for Moraine to get stilled. I don't really think that's what it is. I still do enjoy watching the show, I don't hate it, I just feel like there's a lot of bad choices that make it easy to criticize. But again, let's just hope they improve things with Season 2, whenever that may be. I will be making a full review on Season 1, so you can look forward to that. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts were on Episode 8, the season finale. Maybe you agreed with some of the things I mentioned. Maybe you disagreed. Let me know in the comments. Also, subscribe so I can be set free from the dark, friends.